Hello students, hope you are doing fine at home. Today we will learn something new. So the name of the new chapter is New Kings and Kingdoms of India between 700 to 1200 AD. Okay, we are here to learn about the new kings who established their new kingdoms in India. Okay, between 700 to 1200 AD, almost a good span of time, almost 500 years of span of time. Okay, now we would be studying what all things happened, how new kingdoms were established. Okay, so to start with, we will study how this development took place. Precisely, we'll have to study how things were at that point in time. So we'll look at the political development in North India between 700 to 1200 AD. Now, India, as we know, was split into mostly north and south because of its geographical features. It was not easy for the north side people to come to south in that time. Okay, so here we go. After the death of Harshavardhana in the mid 7th century AD, his vast empire was broken into pieces. So when King Harshavardhana died in the 7th century AD, his vast empire, his big kingdoms was broken into pieces. A stage of confusion, chaos and anarchy prevailed in northern India. A large number of small states who were feudatories emerged as independent kingdoms. These kingdoms were involved in mutual wars. Now what happened after his death? There were large number of small states which came up because the big king was dead, and feudatories, the word feudatory, it's a person. Feudatory is a person to whom the ruler grants a land on certain condition of service, right? So you have the emperor or the big king, and he has his courtmen who work for him. So he used to grant some piece of land to them, saying that you do your duty to me and you are the owner of this land. Okay, now once King Harshavardhana died, everyone started thinking that they are their own king of their land. So a number of feudatories emerged as independent kingdoms. Small states came into existence. Okay. During the period of 5 centuries, generally known as the Rajput period, important political developments took place in India. In the 8th century, 3 powerful kingdoms arose in India and Deccan. This was especially in the northern side of India. These included the kingdoms of the Gurjara, the Pratiharas, the Palas and the Rashtrakutas. These powerful kingdoms were mutually warring. So there were main 3 powers who came into existence and established their kingdoms. So those were the Gurjar Pratiharas, the Palas and the Rashtrakutas. However, these 3 kingdoms were always fighting. Okay? The political condition had, however, little impact on the social economic structure of India. Cultural traditions also remained stable. In the 10th century, several Rajput kingdoms also emerged in northern and central India. These included the Chamanas or the Chauhanas, the Parmaras, the Bundelas, Solankis and Chandelas. So in the 10th century, there are many more Rajput kingdoms who came into power in the northern side and the central side of India. So which were they? They were the Chauhanas, they were the Bundelas, Paramars, Solankis and Chandelas. In the 11th century, Mahmud of Ghazni invaded India and plundered many towns, cities, and temples. In the late 12th century, Muhammad Ghori invaded India and put an end to the Hindu rule in the northern India. These invasions laid foundation for the Sultanate of Delhi and Muslim rule in India. So what happened? These all were fighting amongst themselves. So a new person came. His name was Mahmud Ghazni. First he came and he looted India. Okay, and then in the 12th century, Muhammad Ghori came and defeated everyone in the northern side of India and established the Sultanate of Delhi and the Muslim rule in India. So let's see who were the different parts that came up in the northern side of India. So to start with, we have Gurjar Pratiharas between 730 AD to 1018 AD. The Pratiharas are also known as Gurjar Pratiharas, as they were the descendants of the Gurjaras who had entered India shortly after the Hunas. They ruled over Avanti, which is Malwa, and southwestern parts of Rajasthan, and later occupied Kannauj. Nagabhatta first was the first great ruler of this dynasty. He crushed the Arab Muslims of Sindh. His son Vatsaraja conquered Kannauj and made it his capital. Mihira Bhoja was another famous ruler in this dynasty who adopted the title of Adivaraha after subduing the Palas of Bengal. During the reign of Mahendrapala I, the successor of Mihiraja Bhoja, the Pratiharas commanded the entire northwestern India. The Pratyahara Empire now stretched from the Himalayas in the north to the Vindhyas in the south, and from Gujarat in the west to Bengal in the east. After Mahendrapala, the Pratyahara kingdom began to decline because of the weak and incompetent ruler. So among the Gurjar Pratyaharas, there were strong kings, namely Nagabhatta first, and then his son, and then Mahendrapala was also there. So these kings ruled very nicely, and after Mahendrapala first, the empire of the Pratyahara kingdom began to fall because of the weak rulers. Now we look at another kingdom in northern India, the Palas, which lasted from 750 AD to 1161 AD. The Palas were the rulers of Bihar and Bengal. So the Palas ruled in the parts of Bihar and Bengal in northern India. The western part of Bengal was then known as Gaur and the eastern part as Vanga. The region was then witnessing a great turmoil and unrest. Gopala, elected as the king by the nobles of Bengal, founded the Pala dynasty. During the reign for 20 years, he gave a stable administration to Bengal. So a new king was elected by the nobles. His name was Gopala, and he founded the Pala dynasty. So he ruled for almost 20 years and gave a good administration to Bengal. His son Dharmapala ruled for 40 years and expanded his kingdom across the Gangetic plains. He was a Buddhist and founded the famous monastery of Vikramshila, which later grew into a university. Devpala was great conqueror too. He conquered Orissa and Assam. He was a great patron of learning. He built the famous Mahabodhi temple at Bodh Gaya. Towards the end of the 12th century, the Pala kingdom fell to the invasion of Bakhtiyar Khilji, the general of Muhammad Ghori. So the Pala kingdom was founded by Gopala, we have seen this, and then there were a couple of good rulers who were ruling in the northern side especially from Bihar to Bengal. Now they built the monastery of Vikramshila, which later grew into a university. Slowly and steadily, arts learning flourished during the period of Devpala. However, the Pala kingdom fell to the invasion of Bakhtiyar Khilji. Bakhtiyar Khilji was a general of Muhammad Ghori, and thus the Pala kingdom ended. Moving ahead, we'll see the Rashtrakutas. So the Rashtrakuta kingdom ruled over the Deccan. They were feudatories under the Chalukyas of Badami. They rose to power under Dantivarman, also known as Danti Durga. He established an independent kingdom and made Malkhed his capital, located near Solapur, Maharashtra. He was a great conqueror. He defeated the rulers of Kanchi, Kalinga, Koshala, Malwa, etc., and the Chalukya ruler Kirtivarman II. He was assumed the title of Maharaja Adiraja Parameshwara and Param Bhattaraka. His successor Krishna I extended his kingdom up to Karnataka. Krishna's successor Dhruva extended his empire to river Kaveri in south. The Rashtrakuta empire stretched from Kannauj to Kanyakumari and from Bharuch to Varanasi during the reign of Govinda III, the son of Dhruva. Amogavarsha I ruled for 60 years. Krishna III, the last brilliant Rashtrakuta ruler, defeated the Cholas and conquered Kanchi and Tanjore and the Paramaras of Ujjaini. During their rule for nearly 200 years, the Rashtrakutas gave political unity and stability to Deccan. They got excavated rock-cut caves in the Deccan. So the Rashtrakutas also ruled nicely, and the kingdom was stretching from Kannauj to Kanyakumari. Okay, that's a long distance. Now we come to a tripartite struggle. So what a tripartite struggle means? The Gurjar Pratiharas, Palas and Rashtrakutas were contemporary. They were engaged in constant struggle to gain hold of Kannauj, which was then a symbol of sovereignty. So these three kingdoms, which kingdoms? The Gurjar Pratiharas, the Palas and the Rashtrakutas were always fighting to gain hold on the territory of Kannauj. Kannauj at that point in time was a very famous place. The constant struggle among the rulers of the three kingdoms is known as tripartite struggle. So these three struggling for the power, and their struggle came to be known as tripartite struggle. This struggle weakened all the three dynasties and it led to their downfall. So all these three kingdoms were fighting, continuously fighting, due to which once a time came wherein they were all weakened, and hence their rule came to an end. The Rajputs. Around the end of the 10th century AD, the kingdoms of Pratiharas, Palas and Rashtrakuta declined almost simultaneously. New dynasties arose in these territories. Most of these new dynasties were Rajput, who are known for their bravery, chivalry, honor and prestige in Indian history. The Rajputs played an important role in the history of India during the medieval period. Their origin is shrouded in mystery. They were either Suryavanshis or Chandravanshis. Some of the famous Rajput dynasties during the medieval period were the Gahadwalas of Kannauj, the Parmaras of Malwa and the Chandelas of Bundelkhand, the Chauhanas of Ajmer, the Solankis of Gujarat, the Kalchuris of Tripuri, the Tomars of Delhi, the Senas of Bengal, etc. The Rajput kings frequently fought amongst themselves. Their disunity attracted the Turkish invasion. Again, if you fight amongst yourself, the unity is broken. Okay? So over here also the Rajput kings were fighting frequently amongst themselves, and hence this attracted the Turkish invasion. The Turkey people came from outside to attack in India. Now we move ahead with the new kingdom that was there. The Chahmanas or the Chauhanas of Ajmer and Delhi. This kingdom was between 975 to 1192 AD. The earlier Chauhanas were feudatories of the Pratiharas. In the beginning of the 10th century, however, they declared themselves independent. Right? So the Pratihara kingdom gave some land to the Chauhanas. Once the Pratihara kingdom was declining, the Chauhanas proclaimed themselves. They said that we are now the independent area kings. Among the Chauhana rulers, Arno Raja was an important ruler who defeated Sultan Mahmud near Ajmer and conquered Bundelkhand, Delhi and parts of Punjab. Visaldeva or Vigraraja Fort was the mighty ruler who annexed Gujarat and captured Delhi and Hansi. Several rulers of Malwa and Rajputana too accepted his supremacy. Prithviraja too was a brave warrior who captured Bhiwani, Rewari and parts of Alwar and defeated the Chandela rulers too. He was, however, defeated by Muhammad Ghori in the second battle of Tarain. Moving next, we look at the new kingdom that was there, the Paramaras. Between 949 to 1305 AD. The earlier Paramaras, rulers of Malwa, were perhaps feudatories to the Rashtrakutas. They declared themselves independent in 968 AD. Munja was a brave warrior who defeated the Hunas and the Kalchuris and later annexed Mount Abu and Gujarat. Raja Bhoja, the nephew of Munja, is considered the most famous Paramaras ruler. He made Dahar his capital. Now we move ahead and see another kingdom that was there. Those were the Chandelas. The Chandela kingdom arose out of the rule of the Pratihara Empire, of which Bundelkhand was a part. The Chandelas were feudatories of the Pratiharas. They declared themselves independent in 900 AD. Yashovarman was a great warrior. He captured Kalinjar, Chedi and Malwa and defeated the rulers of Koshla, Mithila and Gaur, which is Bengal. His son, Dhangdev, another brave and warrior, defeated the Pratihara rulers of Kannauj and Koshala. Kirtivarman and Madanvarman too were great warriors. So we have seen these many kingdoms coming up who defeated each other, and after some time they got defeated and their kingdom also declined. Now we come to the last kingdom that rose in northern India, that is the Solankis. The Solankis rose to power under the Mularaja I, who established himself in Gujarat and made Ahilwara his capital. Siddharaja was the most powerful ruler of the Solanki dynasty. He defeated the Chauhanas, Paramaras and the Chandelas. His successor, Kumarpala, conquered Konkan in south. Mularaja too defeated Muhammad Ghori near Mount Abu. The invasion of Alauddin Khilji in 1297 AD dealt a final blow to his dynasty, and Solanki kingdom was annexed to the Sultanate of Delhi. So the Solankis were also very powerful. They established their dynasty. However, Alauddin Khilji put an end to their kingdom in the year 1297 AD. Rajput rulers were great patrons of learning and literature. Some rulers like Munja and Bhoja were themselves gifted poets. So they used to learn and they used to appreciate arts a lot, and they were very good learners also. They used to study. Okay. Bhoja patronized many scholars. Art and architecture also flourished under the Rajput rulers. They built a large number of palaces, forts, temples, etc. Temples were built in three distinct styles. Most of the temples in North India were built in the Nagar style, while those of the Central India belonged to the Besar style, and those of the South India were built in the Dravid style. The Khajuraho temple of Madhya Pradesh, built by the Chandela rulers, are the best examples of the Nagar style. Rajasthan also abounds in temple built in Nagar style. The Panchayatana temple and the Sun temple of Osia are grand and beautiful. The Dilwara temple at Mount Abu is the best example of architecture. These temples have octagonal domes and are decorated with subjects drawn from Jain mythology. The temples of Gujarat resemble those of Rajasthan in their style. The Somnath temple, built by the Solanki ruler, is one of the finest temple architecture. Temples and palaces are decorated with murals. Miniature paintings also began during this time. Rajasthan and Pahari styles of paintings were also developed during this period. So we have seen these many kingdoms were strong enough to come up in the 700 to 1200 AD period. We will now quickly look at India, how it looked in the 9th century. So you can see kingdoms of North India in the 9th century. So we have seen about the Gurjar Pratiharas, the Chandelas, the Paramaras, Rashtrakutas, right? Towards the Bay of Bengal you can see the Palas, right? So these are the kingdoms which came up and which sustained for a long time in India, in northern India to be precise. So it's a quick map of how the political development was taking place under these rulers. Moving ahead, after studying the new kings and kingdoms and the political development in the northern India, we will now look forward for the invasions done by Mahmud of Ghazni and invasion of Muhammad Ghori. So let's start with the invasion of Mahmud of Ghazni. Mahmud of Ghazni was the first Turkish invader. Turkish invader means he came from Turkey. An invader means who comes from somewhere outside. Okay. He ascended the throne of Ghazni, a small kingdom in Afghanistan, in 998 AD. He dreamt of establishing a vast empire in Central Asia, for which he needed huge resources to build a strong army. He had heard of fabulous riches of the temples and palaces in India. He raided India 17 times between 1000 AD to 1027 AD. He plundered many cities and temples. Some of his famous campaigns were against Nagarkot in 1009 AD, Thaneshwar in 1014 AD, Mathura and Kannauj in 1018 AD, Kalinjar in 1021 AD, and Somnath in 1025 AD. The invasion of Somnath was the most disastrous one. In all his campaigns, He plundered the wealth of temples, destroyed them, and broke the idols of the deities. Mahmud's invasion shook the whole of northern and western India. The country became exposed to future Turkish invasions. Mahmud captured the northwestern parts of India. This fact greatly facilitated future attacks of Muhammad Ghori. The Turks introduced Islam in India. Al-Biruni, a great Persian scholar who visited India during an expedition of Mahmud, wrote various accounts of India in his book called the Tarikh-e-Hind. We also get vivid accounts of India by Firdausi, who wrote Kitab-ul-Hind and Shahnama. So along with Mahmud of Ghazni, there were many people who came. Okay, among them was some scholars who also wrote many things, many accounts on India. So one of the book is called Tarikh-e-Hind, written by Al-Biruni, and the other books written by Firdausi are called Kitab-ul-Hind and Shahnama. Okay. Now we come to the next point, invasion of Muhammad Ghori. In 1175 AD, another wave of Turkish invasion under Muhammad Ghori engulfed northern India. Muhammad Ghori was a ruler of Ghor, a small kingdom in Afghanistan. He was an ambitious person. He dreamt of a large empire in Central Asia. As he could not succeed there, he turned towards India. He invaded India not merely to plunder but also to rule. Now Muhammad Ghori wanted to rule in India. That's the reason he had his intention to attack. By 1190 AD, he captured Peshawar, Lahore, Sialkot, and also annexed Punjab and Sindh. So these many territories he conquered. Earlier in 1178 AD, he was defeated by Bhimdeva Solanki, the ruler of Gujarat. Ghori turned to conquer the Gangetic plains. He confronted Prithviraj II, the Chauhan of Delhi and Ajmer. But Ghori was defeated in the first battle of Tarain in 1191 AD. In the second battle of Tarain in 1192 AD, Ghori defeated Prithviraj. In 1194 AD, he defeated Jaichand, the ruler of Kannauj, who had helped him against Prithviraj. He annexed Kannauj in 1198 AD. He appointed Qutbuddin Aibak as the governor of the conquered territories in India and returned home. So this was Muhammad Ghori's invasion. Now we will see, as we have seen, the political developments that were taking place between 700 to 1200 AD in the northern side. Now we will see the political developments in the south of India during the same time, that is between 700 to 1200 AD. The region lying south of the Vindhyas mountains, known as the Dakshinapat in ancient literature, comprises the peninsular plateau interspersed with forested hills and river valleys. The rugged topography and the dense forest caused the development of a culture entirely different from that of the North India. So the reason is the Vindhyachal mountains stood in between. So India was split in two parts, Northern India and South India. So we have already seen the kingdoms of Northern India. Now we are seeing the kingdoms of South India. Okay. There is hardly any mixture of cultures in Southern India. We have studied the ancient history of South India in the previous class. During the medieval period, there was unprecedented struggle for power among regional kingdoms of the south. We can better understand history of the peninsular India between 700 AD to 1200 AD under two heads, that is the history of Deccan and the history of South India. So we will need to understand in two things. South was again split into the Deccan kingdoms and the South Indian kingdoms. Okay, so we'll first look at the Deccan kingdoms. The Deccan kingdoms included the Rashtrakutas, Western Chalukyas, Yadavas, Kakatiyas, and the Hoysalas. Most of these dynasties were feudatories, which later became independent. Most of these kingdoms fought with each other. However, they made rich contributions to cultural development of their territory. We have already read about the Rashtrakutas. So the Rashtrakuta kingdom was already there in the north side. It was slightly spread towards the Deccan also. The Chalukyas of Kalyani are also known as the Western Chalukyas. Their empire stretched from the Krishna River in the north to Vengi in the south in Andhra Pradesh. The Yadavas ruled over Devgiri near Daulatabad in Maharashtra. The Hoysalas were feudatories of the Cholas and the Western Chalukyas. They ruled over Mysore, which is in Karnataka, and parts of Tamil Nadu. Their capital was Dwarasamudra near Mysore city. The Kakatiyas were feudatories of the Western Chalukyas. They ruled over Warangal. Now we come to the kingdoms of South India. Okay. The Pallavas, Pandyas and the Cholas were powerful kingdom in the South India. The Pallavas ruled over the plains of Tamil Nadu. Their capital was at Kanchi. They were feudatories of the Satvahans of Andhra, who later became independent. They were great patrons of art and architecture. They got built Rath temple. So the Pallava rulers built the great Rath temple in the south. The Pandyas ruled over Madurai. They were great maritime power. The Cholas re-emerged as a great power in the 8th century due to the Pallava and Pandya rivalry. As we had seen a quick example of how the powers, different kingdoms were spread out in the northern India, we'll similarly see how the diagram of India looked in the Deccan and south of India. So you can see over here the Yadava kingdom, the Kakatiyas, the Rashtrakutas, the Chalukyas, the Hoysalas, the Pallavas, the Cholas, the Pandyas, all in the South India between 700 to 1200 AD. In the similar manner, we will now look at a complete map of India which comprises of both north and south sections of India. So this is the map of India, how it looks, how the small kingdoms were divided in north and south. So you can see the Chamanas, the Tomars, the Paramars, Kalchuris, Yadavas, Solankis in the north side, and when you come to the south you have the Kakatiyas, Chalukyas, Hoysalas, Pandyas, etc. So this is how India looked in that point in time. Now students will quickly do a case study of the Chola dynasty, okay, the Chola kingdom. The Cholas of the medieval period are known as the Imperial Cholas. Vijayalala was the founder of the Imperial Chola dynasty who conquered Tanjore from the Pallavas. His son Pranantaka first adopted the imperialist policy of his father and captured Madurai after defeating the Pandyas. He adopted the title of Madurai Kundaran, that is the conqueror of Madurai. Okay, so we are about to learn how the Chola kingdom in the medieval period flourished, how it came into existence. Okay, Rajaraja I and Rajendra I were the two most distinguished Chola kings. Rajaraja I is known for rebuilding the Chola Empire with his efficient administration and trade. He defeated the Cheras of Kerala and the Pandyas of Madurai. He also conquered the northern part of Sri Lanka and made it a Chola province under the name of Mummadi Cholamandalam. He also conquered Kalinga, Maldive Island and Lakshadweep Island. He defeated the Western Chalukyas also. Rajendra I annexed the whole of Sri Lanka, his army marched up to Ganga river in the Pala kingdom. He adopted the title of Ganga Konda and established a new capital town near the mouth of river Kaveri and named this town as Gangai Kondachalopuram. Rajendra I possessed a powerful fleet. He sent a naval expedition in 1025 AD to conquer the Srivijaya Empire, which included Malaya, Java and Sumatra. The Chola rulers also sent emissaries to China. The rulers of Shailendra dynasty of the Srivijaya Empire were friendly with the Chola king. Later, the Cholas had to fight against the neighboring kingdom and also faced internal conflict which resulted in the gradual decline of their power. So we will now understand how the Chola kingdom worked. Okay, the Chola administration was highly organized and efficient. The king headed the government. The administration was carried out through officials who were paid land in grant. So the king used to do all the administration work and his officials used to get some land paid for doing the king's work. The empire was divided into 6 mandalams. Mandalams means provinces, okay, which were administered by governors, usually royal princes. Each mandalam was then divided into Valanadas, those are districts, and each Valanadu into a number of nadus. Nadus means villages. Large towns were known as Taniyur. The villages were administered through system of local self-government. Ur, Sabha and Nagaram were the 3 villages assemblies which played a key role in uniting the people of the village. People elected their own assemblies. The council appointed various committees for collecting revenue, maintaining law and order, and providing justice. The Mahasabha was the assembly in the villages given to Brahmins. The Nagarama was the assemblies where traders and merchants dominated. The Cholas had a powerful army consisting of infantry, archers, cavalry, elephant corps, and naval fleet. Navy was the most powerful wing of the army. It was used for keeping control over the land and for maintaining commercial relationship with distant landlords over the sea. The well-organized navy enabled the Chola kings to undertake so many successful expeditions. So they had an army of ships which is called navy, right? You have a lot of ships over there. That's the reason they were very powerful, the Chola kings. Revenue and trade. Tax on land and trade was the main source of revenue. Revenue was used for the maintenance of the royal household, for public works, for salaries of officials and maintenance of the army. Trade flourished under the Chola rule. Foreign trade was carried out with the South Asian countries. The traders were organized into money gramans, guilds. Textiles, spices, ivory, jewels, etc. were the main items of export. Horses were imported from Arabia. Kolotunga sent a Chola emissary of 72 merchants to China in 1077 AD to explore possibilities of developing trade. So another king sent a team of 72 merchants to China for the development of trade. The Chola society. The king was the most powerful person in the Chola society. Other members of the royal family were also very important person. Below them were the high officials whose offices often hereditary. They exercised a lot of authority and held a position of honor in the society. The Brahmins were held in the high esteem by the rulers. They were granted tax-free land called the Brahma Deya or the Agarahaga. The merchants too held a position of prestige by virtue of wealth. The majority of people formed the common people. The upper caste dominated the lower caste and put severe restrictions on them. They were debarred from entering temple and were not allowed to draw water from the village wells or tanks. The state authorities paid great attention to the promotion of agriculture, art, craft, trade. Land surveys were undertaken and land revenue was assessed on the basis of the quality of the land. There was a good system of road and communication. Merchants were organized into guilds and carried out internal and external trade. The merchants called Chettis traded with Arabia, Persia, China, and countries of the Southeast Asia. Many foreign merchants settled in prosperous coastal towns. Now, arts and architecture. The Cholas made remarkable contribution to art and architecture. Tanjore and Gangaikonda Cholapuram had many beautiful gardens, halls, temples and places. Brihadareshwara temple at Tanjore, built by Raja Rajeshwara, is the finest example of the temple architecture in Dravid style. Lofty Gopuram, which means gateways, such as one at Kumbakonam, multi-storied Vimana decorated with sculptures and huge seated Nandi, the sacred bull, are the chief characters of this temple. There was another massive temple at Gangaikonda Cholapuram, the new capital city built by Rajendra Chola in Trichanappalli district. The city was also adorned with magnificent palace and vast artificial lake with stone embankment more than 15 miles long. All these are now in ruins. The Cholas were excellent sculptors too. They were masters in making images of god and goddesses in stone as well as bronze. The Nataraja statue in bronze is a masterpiece of sculpture. Now, religion. Hinduism was the main religion of the South India. Though Buddhism, Jainism, Islam and Christianity were also prevalent, Vaishnavism and Shaivism were the two main sects of Hinduism. The Lingayat, founded by Basava of Karnataka, was the most popular sect in the Chola kingdom. Bhakti movement was also started by Nayanar and Alwar saint in the South India. Devotional songs in the praise of Shiva and Vishnu were composed in local languages. Adi Shankara, born in Kerala in the year 788 AD, was a great philosopher of this period. At a very young age, he became well versed with Vedas and other religious scriptures. He preached his philosophies through debates with the learned people. He organized 10 branches of Advaita philosophy and established four mathas in 4 corners of the country at Badrinath, Dwarka, Puri and Kanchi. Ramanuja, born in Tirupati around 1017 AD, was another great philosopher of the period. He tried to assimilate bhakti into traditions of Vedas and thus made the Vedas more popular. Madhava preached bhakti towards Krishna. Education and learning. The temples played an important role in the culture and economic life of the people in South India. They developed into institutions providing education, medicine, hospitality and employment to people. Each temple had an attached matha which provided free education, food, clothing and boarding to students. Besides, cultural activities, live fairs and festivals were also held in the temple premises. These activities are still continuing in the South Indian temple. Sanskrit and Tamil were the main languages. Kannada and Telugu were also made popular by Bhakti saints. The Ramayana and the Mahabharata were translated into South Indian languages Silapadikaram and Manime Kalai were the two epics in Tamil, revered like the Ramayana and Mahabharata. These epics provide valuable information on ancient history of South India. Pampa, Ponna, and Rana called the three gems of Kannada who wrote Puranic literature. The Jain Lingayat saints preached in Kannada. Nannayana was the first Telugu poet to translate the Ramayana into Telugu. He also wrote on grammar. Kamban, Oltakottan, and Puglenid were the three gems of Tamil literature. Kamban wrote the Ramayana in Tamil language. So these are different people, different scholars who translated the holy books. Now we come to the next topic, that is agrarian expansion in Tamil Nadu. The Chola ruled for more than 5 centuries. They paid great attention to the promotion of agriculture in Tamil Nadu. They paid special attention to irrigation. The water of Kaveri river were used for this purpose. Several tanks were also built. The Chola rulers provided a tank committee which looked after the distribution of the water in the fields. The Chola rulers carried out elaborate land surveys for the purpose of fixing the government's share of the land revenue. In doing so, they always kept the interest of the farmers in mind. In case of crop failures due to drought or floods, the land revenue was exempted. Loans were also provided to farmers to meet emergencies. Hope students you have understood how the case study of the Chola kingdom was. Thank you.